And he asks for forgiveness because he's going to relate to us something called a myth, or a myth made flesh, which is an extremely long excerpt from the Gospel of John, which I'll read in full. And I haven't posted it on the slide because it must be the author's own translation because I can't find it. So I'll read from the book the full excerpt, which is sort of needed to expand later on, and it is quite long. So, when the Father had accomplished his work on the seventh day of creation that he had made through his word, he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had made. And the Father blessed the seventh day, and he sanctified it, because on this day he rested from all his work that he had created. Thus the seventh day is blessed and sanctified, because it is the day not of the world and of the movement of the world, but rather of the Father himself alone. It is the seventh part of the circle of movement of the world, when he withdraws and becomes immobile and silent. Thus it was that the circle of movement of the world was not closed, but remained open. And the seventh day was sanctified and blessed as the open part of the circle of the movement of the world, in such a way that the beings of the world had access to the Father, and the Father had access to them. But the serpent said, "There is no freedom for the world, insofar as the circle of the world is not closed, because freedom is to be in oneself, without interference from outside, especially from above on the part of the Father. The world will always follow the will of the Father and not its own, insofar as there is an opening in the circle of the world, insofar as the Sabbath exists." And the serpent took his tail in his mouth and thus formed a closed circle. He turned himself with great force and thus created in the world a great swirl which caught hold of Adam and Eve. And the other beings upon whom Adam had impressed the names and he gave them followed them. And the serpent said to the beings of the world, moving on this side of the closed circle that he formed by taking his tail in his mouth and setting himself in rotation, "Here is your way. You will commence by my tail and you will arrive at my head. Then you will have traversed the length of the circle of my being, and you will have within you the entire closed circle. And thus you will be free as I am free." But woman guarded the memory of the world opened towards the Father and the holy Sabbath. And she offered herself for the rending of the closed circle in herself in order to give birth to children issuing from the world beyond it, and from the world where there is the Sabbath. Thus originated the suffering of the pregnancy, and thus originated sorrow on this side of the world of the serpent. And hostility came between woman and the serpent, between the generations of woman giving birth with pain and the generations of the serpent giving birth with pleasure. The former will crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent will wound the heel of the woman. For woman moves in a contrary sense to the movement of the serpent, and her head reaches to the tail of the serpent, and her heels touch the head of the serpent. This is because in the world, which is in the current of the serpent, suffering is its counter-movement. It was through the counter-movement of suffering that there originated the counter-current of the sons of woman, which is the thought born from suffering and from memory of the world of the Sabbath. Thus the sons of woman set up altars to the Father this side of the world of the serpent. And Enosh, son of Seth, not only worshipped the Father, but even came to know his name. He began to invoke the name of the Father, but Enoch, a descendant of Seth, went still further. He walked with God. Genesis 3:22. He did not pass through the bitterness of death, which for living beings on this side of the circle of the serpent is the way out of the closed circle of serpent. For he was taken up by the Father. Genesis 3:24. For about that time, thought aspiring to the Father succeeded in piercing the circle of the serpent and in accomplishing an opening in the closed circle. Thus, initiation and prophecy could be established on this side of the world of the serpent. Initiation kept living the memory of the world of the Sabbath, and prophecy nourished the hope of deliverance from the circle of the serpent and the future re-establishment of the world of the Sabbath. Buddhas taught the way of going out from the world of the serpent and arriving at the repose of the Sabbath. But the prophets proclaimed the transformation of the world of the serpent from within it by the coming of the Word, which will live in the world of the serpent and will re-establish within the world of the serpent not only the Sabbath but also the other 6 days of creation, such as they were before. A third of the beings from each of them were uprooted and swept down by the closed whirlwind of the serpent. Revelation XII 4. This came to be the woman virgin, who is the soul of the counter-movement to the serpent and of suffering since the beginning of the world of the serpent, received, conceived, and gave birth to the Word of the Father. And the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst men in the world of the serpent, full of grace and truth. John I 14. So, what does that all mean? We can see the spiritual history describing the stages of opening the closed circle of the serpent and allowing light to enter into this closed circle, opening up pathways of exit via the incarnation of the Word, opening up the closed circle, the fall via ways of faith, via ways of hope, via ways of love, and the active presence of the divine descends into the heart of the circle of the serpent and opens up ways which that circle deems a priori closed.